Hello, this is Mr. Jarrett, and in this video tutorial I am going to be taking you through the pen tool demo. So this is part one of the pen tool learning the basics or understanding the basics activity. And you will see here that it says in this activity you're going to learn several new tools, techniques, and tricks in Illustrator. So the knowledge will not only better your skills in Illustrator, but it will also tremendously help you in future activities. The pen tool itself is probably the most powerful drawing tool in Illustrator, at least in my own personal opinion. Okay, that is what I use to draw everything. So I'm going to teach you the ins and outs of the pen tool, and it's definitely one of those tools that is very tricky, but it takes some practice. And if you combine that with some of the other little techniques and tricks that I'll teach you, you hopefully will pick it up and you'll be really good at it by the end of this semester. So you'll see that we're going to learn the pen tool. We're going to learn how to add an anchor point, delete an anchor point. We're actually going to learn the pen point or the anchor point tool. So it's a little bit different. You'll actually use what's called the join tool, and you'll even get to edit a gradient a little bit different than what you may have seen in the past. So for part one, all it says is open the demo file and follow my instructions, my demonstration. This video is showing you that demonstration, but I will be doing this live as well in person. So the pen tool file actually looks like this. So you need to go into your visual design folder, and it might be called something different whenever you actually are opening yours, but for this video, my folder it's called Pen Tool Gaining and Understanding, and inside there you will see the Pen Tool demo. Okay, so you want to double click and open that thing up, and it should open up like this. So you can see I have two different artboards, artboard 1, artboard 2. Artboard 2 I'll explain as being the enrichment. So you can see over here in my layers panel, I have your tracings, that's this stuff right here where it says your tracings. I have enrichment, which I currently have turned off because I don't want it to be a distraction, but just to show you, if you want to do this a little bit later on, I give you some basic instructions here and you can try your best to draw that fish, okay, as enrichments. For the examples, the example layer is all of this stuff over here. I have it all in one layer. So I would recommend just locking that layer. That way you don't, bother it or do anything to it. And you're just going to be on the your tracings. So if you hold an Alt and you zoom in up here, you'll see it has some basic directions. It says open your layers and stroke windows. Well, hopefully we already have that done. So layers and stroke windows or panels, whatever you want to call them. And it says the Shift plus Control key and A resets the tool. Okay, resets the tool. So I'm going to take my left hand, because I'm using the mouse with my right hand. And my left hand, like normal, always hovers down in the bottom left-hand corner of my keyboard. And if you want to kind of just look at the keyboard first, I put my pinky on the control button, my ring finger on the shift, and then A is normally my middle finger. So it's kind of boom, boom, boom right next to one another, and that resets the tool. So that is different than hitting escape. Okay, it does a different thing. So that's important to understand. Shift, Control, and A resets the tool. Okay. So first off, let's get a little understanding where the pen tool is. So if we look over here at our tool menu, you can see there is one that looks like an old school ink pen, and there's a different one called the curvature tool. This is newer to Illustrator in the past couple years or updates, and we will actually be using that down here for number 3. So you will get to play with that a little bit too. But if you click the little drop down next to the pen tool, you'll be able to see the different options that pop up. And you have the add, the delete, and the anchor point tool. Okay, so those are all editing tools down here. The pen tool is the main tool, that's the drawing tool. And if you're really good with quick keys, normally your right hand is on the mouse, but the P button switches right to the pen tool. So if you're ever drawing, you want to switch back and forth, you're good with quick keys, you can do that. I'm not so good at that, so I just come over here and click on the pen tool. But the pen tool basically works on you clicking, and it will kind of not only fill in if it's a closed in shape, or if the dots are moved away from one another, it will try to close it in like an actual shape, but it also strokes whatever line you're drawing. Okay, so for right now, I am going to actually just turn my fill to nothing. So make sure your fill is in the foreground. So if it's like this, okay, that means you're not editing your fill. You want to click on your fill so it comes to the foreground and then hit this none button. Okay, so I'll just use a black stroke. That's perfectly fine. Okay, and this says no fill, so that's what I just did, basic stroke, and a weight of 2. So what do I mean by this stuff? Well, if you look up top here, okay, if you have your screen set up how mine is, I'm in the Essentials Classic. If you have that set up here where it says uniform, your uniform is your profile, so mine is uniform, which is basic, okay? And then in here, this is kind of your type of brush that's actually covering it, covering your stroke, and that is also set to basic. Okay, if it says the 2-point oval, that is the same thing as basic. Okay, now if you don't have this up here, you can also see that same thing down here. So you can set your points to 2. You notice it also changed it up there. It's the same thing. All of this stuff is good. I'll explain that later on. We're not doing dash line or anything like that. No arrowheads. Your profile is just uniform. So it's all the same thing. It's just labeled in 2 different places. Okay, and I'm going to zoom out and zoom over here a little bit more. And for number 1, I'm just going to kind of draw in this area. So if you just click, don't click and hold, just click, you can see it put an anchor point. And now it's kind of asking me, where do I want to move this to? So I drew over here a perfectly straight line. So I'm going to do 2 examples for you. If you move your mouse straight over to the side, it does kind of do a good job of snapping in to a perfectly straight line. So if I just click, and you can see there's my anchor point there, and that was Shift, Control, and A will reset it. Okay. But another little trick is if I hold in Shift when I'm drawing, see how I'm down here on an angle? Now I'm not even moving my mouse, but if I hold in Shift, it locks you into either a 45-degree angle or a straight horizontal or a straight up and down vertical. So Shift will give you a perfectly straight line as well. Okay, so that's just 2 different examples. And again, Control Shift A resets it. Okay, so you can just draw one line, that's fine. So next it says change the weight to 5, and this time we're going to try to do this little curly Q. Now yours probably isn't going to be perfect, that's fine. This whole entire thing is just for practice. Okay, so don't get all worked up if yours isn't perfect. I'm going to change my weight to 5 just so you can see how it adds a little bit of thickness here. And when I click this time, when I click this time, you can see it wants to project in a straight line. Okay, so instead of clicking, what I'm going to do is click and hold. So right about here, click and hold, and you can actually bend this line. So when you're bending that, you see from my anchor point, you got these 2 little lines coming out to either side, and there's 2 little end dots. Okay, so those end dots are called your handles. So if I just let go now, after I kind of make my little mountain or hill here look like it's symmetrical, now it's going to try to rebalance itself by following that handle. Okay, and a good way of explaining this kind of balancing of this or rebalancing of this handle would be to kind of look at it almost like on a tightrope. So if you kind of ever seen this, or maybe if you just stand up and try to stand on one foot, when you're trying to lean to one side or another, you probably put your arms out to help yourself balance. Okay, it widens your center of gravity. So if you look at this person here as like the anchor point and these as the handles, and say this handle was lower than this handle, okay, you're going to need to lean to the left to rebalance yourself to get level again. Well, Illustrator is doing the same thing. So you curled it up around like this. So in order for it to rebalance itself, it kind of leans back away from the way you curved it. Okay, now that's a lot more than you really need to know. But what this is kind of showing you here is that when you clicked one time and you held and bent that, now it's going to ask you to continue that curve. So I'm going to try to find the symmetrical curve to it. So something somewhere right about there. And I'm going to just click this time. Okay. And it kind of reset the whole entire thing. So if I move back over about the same amount of distance, click and hold, and I drag up. So I'm not only trying to make this hill the same as my other ones, but what I'm also looking at is this connection point right here. If it's on a different angle, you'll see it comes to a point. So I'm going to do a bad one just to kind of show you. So you see how that kind of came to a point here. I'll zoom in so you can see it better. And it kind of came to a point. I'm going to hit Control Z just to go back. What you probably want to do is make sure that this is one smooth path. Okay, so from that last anchor point up and over. So something right about like that. Okay, now it's not perfect, but it's okay. Now I would rebalance myself, try to make a symmetrical one again, and just click that time. And Control Shift A gets you off of that tool. So you can see to make this kind of up and down, zigzag, you're bending the actual line by holding it in. Okay, now you can do that same thing using the curvature tool. So the curvature tool is this one. So this one I don't feel like you have as much control though. So if you just click one time and then click again over here, okay, and then you see how it kind of bends it on its own. So really, if you want to make that hump right there or that hill, you don't need to click here. You actually need to click at the top of it and then at the bottom of it and then down here and then back up here. And you see how you don't really have as much control. Okay, now maybe there's a better way of explaining this or editing this, but I don't necessarily like the curvature tool as much because you don't have as much control. I like to have full control over it. Okay, so now let's go back down here. We're still using that 5 point, and I'm going to switch back over to my pen tool. And this time I'm going to stop it so it doesn't actually curve underneath. So I'll show you how to do this. So you just click once, move over to the side, click and hold, bend that thing up. And now this time, instead of actually drawing again, what you need to do is come back here and click on your anchor point and watch what happens to my tool or my icon right now. So right now you just see a black pen, but when I move over it, see how there's that tiny little caret that pops up next to it? Well, that tiny little caret is actually a symbol for a different tool. So when I click here, what it does is it erases this handle, and now I'm back to the starting point. So I'll show you where that tool is then, so you can better understand that. But let's finish this off first. So I'm going to move over again to my right, click and hold, bend that thing up, and just repeat. Okay. Now again, I don't care how many of these little hills you have, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but Control Shift A gets you off. So that little tool that I was talking about is actually that anchor point tool. So let's talk about some of these right now. The add anchor point, that will just add an actual dot on here. So if you see I've got one there, one here, I can actually add a dot on here anywhere. Okay, and it adds my handles for me of where that's actually curving. The subtract or delete will delete those just by clicking on it. Okay, and this anchor point tool itself is a little tricky, but if you click on an anchor, what that actually does is it kind of resets the entire thing. Now I can click on this line with the anchor point tool and re-drag it around or re-edit it. I can actually click on just one of the handles themselves and edit just one of the handles. Okay, so this is just a little bit trickier. What this is actually doing is it's editing your anchor points and your handles of your actual line. Now this is similar, but it's slightly different than the direct select tool. So with the direct select tool, I can do similar features. This is that white arrow. You can do similar features like clicking on a handle and moving it, clicking on a path and kind of bending it. But what I cannot do with the direct select is reset this anchor point. Okay, so I can move it and everything, but I can't reset it. That is actually the anchor point tool. Okay, that's what that whole entire thing's for. You can click and reset it, or you can click and hold and bend it from the start of that point, which you cannot do with the direct select. So please do not confuse those. They look very similar, but they are slightly different. So again, the add anchor point, self-explainable, it just adds it, delete, deletes it, and this one actually edits the actual anchor points. Okay, so I'm going to go back up to the pen tool. I'm going to do a Control-Shift-A to get off of this. And now let's try to actually draw something. So you learn the basics. Draw a straight line, you can draw how it wiggles, or you can reset the anchor point. So for this one, you can either try to freehand it over here, or you can just copy right off this umbrella. Since you are just practicing for the first time, I would recommend just copying off the umbrella and then dragging it all over. And if you have your example layer locked, it's not going to change the umbrella. Okay, so down here, what I'll do is I'm actually going to draw this handle first. This handle isn't anything pretty, but it's okay. So I'll just start somewhere up in here. I'll click. I'm going to hold in Shift and move straight down. And I can see on the computer, just by looking at the pixels, it's pretty much straight to right here. And then you see that little fuzziness? That's where it starts to bend and curl. So right around that connection point is where I'm going to click. So that's something that you can start to look at on the computer to help yourself understand what curls are. But you're really going to have to kind of just practice with this tool to start to judge curvatures of where to click. And you'll see how I'll explain that on this next one. Okay, but now that I have that, I'm just going to come over here and I'll click and hold. And it's probably not going to be perfect, but that's perfectly fine. Okay, so that's good. So Control-Shift-A, and I'm good for that. All right. Now for this one, this is slightly it's different. It's blue. It's not no outline or anything like that. So as you see, it says any fill, basic stroke, weight of 5. So you can fill this thing in with whatever color you want. I am not going to use that blue because you can't see what I'm actually doing. But I don't want to stroke. So I'll just hit switch and then I'll click up here. So now my fill is in front. And I'm going to change this to something different, something that stands out. So I'll probably just go with green instead of blue. Okay, and now I can edit this. So I'm going to start down here at a point. I'll click right about there. And I don't know if I can make it all the way over here. So I'll try first. I'll just click and hold and see if I can bend it. Now I can tell you that this might kind of knock you off the screen like you can see, but still by holding in on the mouse, I'm also going to hold in with Alt on my keyboard and just scroll wheel down, and that allows me to zoom out a little bit. Okay, but as you see, I can make it all the way across in one solid curve. But however, I can no longer see my bottom. So if this happens to you, what I would recommend doing, finishing your anchor point, coming back here so you're not continuing down, and just switch this to a stroke temporarily, and now you can see what you're doing. Okay, so it's a lot of basic functions that you just repeat in Illustrator. So keeping this the same height, I'll just hold in Shift, and I'll kind of come over here, I'll click and hold, drag that up around, and it's repeating the same functions that we learned before. So click at the end, so your anchor point goes away. I'll come over to this spot. Okay, and just kind of continue that. Again, this does not have to be perfect. This is just for practice. So you see I'm doing this pretty quick, and they are not all symmetrical. Now at the very end, you'll see when you move over this, there's a little circle, meaning it's a complete shape or a complete circle here. So it's a closed-in profile. Okay. So at the very end, it's all connected. I can now change this back to fill. And the reason I did my handle first is because my handle is now behind this. If you did your handle second, your handle is going to be in front, but that's pretty easy because if you just go over here, okay, and you expand, here is my handle, and I can even see that by selecting it. You see how it color codes every layer, and it puts that little color next to whatever's selected. I can simply just drag that beneath. So if yours is above like this, you just simply drag that beneath the top of your umbrella. Okay, pretty easy to edit in Illustrator. All right, now number 6. This says things to learn. you're going to learn the join tool, the ellipse tool, profile change, and you're actually going to learn the gradient fills. So again, we can kind of trace over this. And I tried to find one of the ugliest flowers I could online, one that does not have real nice curves. And that's because I wanted you to actually just kind of break that mold of, I'm not perfect, I'm not tracing this perfect. Get over it. Okay, this is practice. That's all this entire thing is. So you can use black here. That's perfectly fine. Let's make that a stroke. Let's get our pen tool. Make sure you're back on your tracing layer if you haven't. And instead of trying to trace these perfect and stopping right here where the yellow is, I'm going to recommend that you do these all individual, so each one of these petals as individual, but make sure they cross over the last one. And they are also going to be inside of this yellow. So if I confused you on that, just follow me here. I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start somewhere in here. Okay, and I'll just click. And if I'm following this up, I can probably see that it's somewhere right about here is where that kind of flattens out. So this is a curve and it kind of flattens out there and it looks like there's a big long stretch somewhere right about here, and then it curves again to there and kind of back around, right? I don't care if you do that many. I'm actually not going to. I don't care to make this video any longer than it needs to be. So I'm just going to click and hold here and just drag around, and you see how they're not perfect, but that's fine. Okay, and I'm just going to bring that back in, but make sure it goes into the yellow. And I don't care if it goes past this. It really doesn't matter. This is practice. Okay, you can get real particular on your own when we're doing the final projects. So that's all good. Let's do a Control Shift A. And to do this next one, again, I'm going to cross over this line. So I'll start somewhere in here, click up, and just try your best to draw back. If you need to add an extra anchor point, like this one is kind of funky, maybe add an extra anchor point or two, but don't forget to go into your yellow. Okay, so Control Shift A, and I'm just going to continue this. So if you notice there, I didn't really like that curve, and it still comes to a point, but what I did was I went back and I actually clicked on my anchor point because it was going to curve way out here. So that's another little trick you can do too. You can reset it and try your best to match it. But I have all of mine and they are covering over one another now. So this is actually when it says here that you are going to learn the join tool. This is why. So I'll show you an example of how you used to have to do this. So I'm actually going to copy this, paste this right here. You do not need to do that. Okay, please do not do that actually. But I'm going to show you the difficulty of how they used to make you do this before they added the join tool. Okay, or at least this is how I did it. Maybe there was a better way back in the past illustrators. If I had two different shapes like this, what I literally would do is I would go in and I would add an anchor point. I would zoom all the way in, kind of see where they cross. So they cross real close right there. I'd add an anchor point there. Okay, I would delete this bottom anchor point. So the reason why I'm showing you this is to show you how much of an annoyance this is. So that's real close to this one, right? Real close. On that one as well, I would add an anchor point. So moving my mouse over this one now, coming up. I'm going to zoom in even more so you can see. Okay, I know it would right about there they would connect. So I would add an anchor point there. Now think about how tedious this is when you were trying to combine different shapes. Okay, so I had those two different pieces now edited. I'd come back in with the direct select. I'd select one anchor point, hold in shift, just like in other programs if you want to select multiple things. Hold in shift and I'd select this anchor point. And I actually would go up to object, unless they moved it, object, path, and join. So Control J, just to join those two. But then I'd always have this second anchor point. Okay, so that's how you used to have to do this, or how I used to do it until I learned the join tool. So the join tool itself does that, but in a much cleaner way. So over here on the side, you'll see there's drop downs under a whole bunch of different things. So it would be helpful for you to every once in a while just click and hold on the drop down and see where different tools are. But the join tool is right here. It's underneath the rectangle. There's one more tool underneath that. It's called the shaper tool. And then the join tool is hidden beneath it. So what the join tool does is if I kind of just draw around this, it tells the computer that whatever is underneath there that crosses over, I want it to join it together. So look how quick and simple that is. Okay, now there it didn't work out the greatest, so maybe I just do it right there. All right, so it didn't work. So I'll come back to that and see how I can edit that. All right, so some of these they came to points, others they came to a square. So let's see if we can kind of edit some of these now. So now I'm just going to get my direct select. I'll click on this one, and I'll see if I can change that to a point. If I can't, that's still fine because it's underneath my yellow. And over here, sometimes you have the different options of changing these. So you can see right now that the stroke is in the middle, or the path is in the middle, and the stroke's on the outside and inside. So just to kind of explain what some of these are, the stroke alignment will change it so it's all on the inside, or all on the outside, or it will actually do it right in the middle. So if you wanted them all to be a point, you could put it all on the outside, and you could drag your anchor points in. If you're real picky like that, that's fine. But maybe your drawing actually calls for that. So maybe you're not just being picky, you want your drawing to be perfect. And that's fine. So you can actually still edit these and everything like that. This one that's a little screwed up, if I click here with my pen tool and I go back to the anchor point tool, maybe what I can do is kind of just move this line around and see what's going on. Yeah, so they just got crossed over. Yours might not have done that. Of course, mine does, or mine did, because you know it's a demo. So then you can reset these if you really need to. So it doesn't look like it even joined the two. So to get rid of one of those, I would just delete one, and now it's to a point. Okay. So I'm going to take these points and drag them all in, and I'm doing that with the direct select, and I'm just making sure the end of them is inside this yellow. Okay, and the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to draw that yellow shape and fill that in. So maybe I want to fix this because that one's pretty ugly. So the other nice thing you can do is you can not only edit those handles, but you see the longer the handle, the further stretched out it is. So if I just drag that in a little bit, I actually shrunk how stretched out that was. So you might want to do that to fix up some of yours. But again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay. So I'm going to change this from a stroke to a fill, and I'll change this color as well. So maybe let's say red. Okay, red's fine. So you could do this before or after if you want, but you see I have my yellow back here that I can still kind of see. I am going to use, underneath the rectangle tool, I'm going to use the ellipse tool. And if you click and hold here, first off, we got to change our color. I apologize. So Control Z. Let's change our color to something different. So maybe yellow. Okay. Now you could use that purple if you wanted, that purplish blue for your flower or whatever color you want. But for the middle, I'm going to make it a different color. So if I just click and hold, you can see how it's an ellipse or an oval, whatever you want to call it. It's not perfect. So some of you might be smart enough to say, well, hold in shift. Okay, yeah, you hold in shift and it's perfect, but it's not centered. So here's a different trick. Holding in alt actually draws from the circle out. So you see how the icon changes? It almost looks like you're doing a center point now. It's right in the middle. So Alt draws from the center out. Okay, and if you hold in Alt and Shift, it draws it perfect. So that's a little trick. Try to find the middle, but if you can't move the middle, that's okay. Once you draw it, you can just use your arrow tools on your keyboard to move this around. Or you could, of course, use the black select, the normal select tool to center that. And then down here, so this little swivel piece is not actually an outline of this. We are going to do this in one straight path. Okay, so I'll get my pen tool again. I'm going to switch back here, and I'm going to make this a color that stands out. So let's just do black for this demo. All right, I'm going to click all the way up at the top. So this kind of curves to right about here. So you see how it starts the next curve. That's why I'm saying right about here, where one curve stops and another curve starts. So somewhere in here, I'm going to click and hold and kind of bend this and try to find, somewhat of the middle of that shape. And I'm also looking down here where my black arrow is. I'm also trying to keep that handle inside that shape because I know it's going to continue to follow that handle. If it's way out here, then my next line is going to also come out here. So I'm going to take that handle and make sure that it's following inside that shape. Okay, and I'll just let go. And if you see, for my next line, when I bring that all the way down here, you see how it's kind of still following in there? Okay, and this time I'm just going to click. Control Shift A. I'll get my direct select. I'm going to select this line. I'm going to just move my handle around to make that a little bit better. And maybe I need to move my anchor points just a hair. Maybe move my handles just a little bit more. I'm just trying to get this a little bit more centered. Okay. Now, so far we have been using a straight profile or a basic profile. So if we change this profile to something like this, okay, it's going to be thin at both ends. So now let's just bump our weight up. Boom, boom, boom. I don't know, something like 6. 6 might be good, or 8, whatever. But you can see it's thin at the bottom, thin at the top. Okay, if you want to make that green, be my guest. You can make it green, and you can actually just eyedrop this to be the green and switch it over. Okay. Now it took, of course, when I eyedrop this, it takes your profile away and your weight. So you might have to put that back on. All right, so doing these leaves down here. I would, again, change if you're in a different color, something that stands out like black. I'm actually going to change my profile back to the basic one. You could try to do this. I've never tried to do this in one. That shape is kind of similar to this, but I don't know how perfect it would be. But you can try to outline this now. So if we click here, kind of come way down here and click, hold. And again, if you're off your page, still holding the button down on the mouse, also hold Alt in your keyboard, zoom out a little bit so you can reposition and see your screen again. Okay, so that's good. I'm going to click my anchor point. I'll come back up here and try to finish that thing off. And it's probably not going to be perfect, but that's all right. Okay, so something similar like that. Now, I'm only going to do one of them because I'm just going to copy and paste that, and I'll show you how to reflect it over. So that's good. So let's change this to a fill. Now I'll edit my fill, and down here you see there's a color where there's a gradient. So I'm going to hit gradient, and it kind of does a linear gradient to start, linear gradients from left to right. But if you're looking at this other leaf, you can see that it's more like a radial gradient, kind of transforms from white to dark green down here. So I'm going to hit radial gradient. And when you hit edit gradient, it brings up this kind of button. Well, that's the same thing as the gradient tool over here. So I may have taught you before of how to just edit the simple gradient down here by adding colors, but I did not teach you how to like reposition it. So if you kind of come up here right above the tip of this, you click and hold and you just drag down somewhere down to about like in there. Okay, now you actually just put the spotlight or the white up there and it fades down this way. Now how do you get this actual color? Well, if we come down here, if we just click on this gradient slider, okay, we'll add another dot, and I can either edit this black or I can just drag it off. Okay, and I can double click this, and this is actually your gradient picker. So if you use your eyedropper, you can just kind of pick that perfect green. So maybe I pull that all the way over, maybe I add another one in here by clicking in there, and with my color picker, you can see it's almost like a lime green up here. So I'm going to select the lime green, and the lime green is a lot closer to the white. So I'm going to pull that up here more. Okay, now you see the white is also a lot brighter. So this little thing, the gradient slider, that little diamond up at the top, you can actually drag that, and that's the location of this. Okay, so that changes how much power, how close it is. So we don't really want that much lime green in there. All right, so that's pretty darn close. It's not perfect, but it's close. All right, so if I select that and I do a Control C, that's copy. And if you did a Control V, that's paste, but it always pastes right into the middle of your screen. So if you do Control Shift V, it pastes in place, so it's right on top of one another. And then I can go up to Object, Transform, and Reflect. If you hit Preview, you can see what yours is set to. You want it set to a vertical reflection, that's straight up and down reflection. Hit OK, and you can use your arrow keys, or if you hold in Shift and hit the arrow keys, it moves a little bit quicker. This one's not on the exact same angle, but that's fine. You can just rotate it up here just by moving off if you want yours to be very similar. Okay, so now let's move this back over. I'm just going to highlight everything, and I'll just drag this over here. Same thing with my umbrella. Highlight everything, drag it over. And then you can kind of see the before and after. So hopefully you learned a little bit about the pen tool. You learned a little bit about the join tool, the gradients, how to add anchors, delete anchors and edit it a little bit. And of course, the more practice you have, the better. So I actually added some extra practice for you. There is a fun way of practicing. Hopefully, if this has changed a little bit, hopefully I still have some of these links here, but you'll see I probably have a pen tool practice game somewhere for you if you want to try to play that. This is kind of with what the letters look like. So you'll see it says a letter shaping game. It says hold in Shift to snap or an Alt for a quick preview. Okay, so Alt takes these off, but basically this is like kind of editing how you would in Illustrator. Okay, so there's a compare button at the very end, and I know it's not the easiest because you don't necessarily know what this cue looks like to begin with, but you can kind of see by holding an Alt that it's not perfect. So just try to use your own visualization and see how that curve would go. So I'll bend this over, maybe bend this one over a little bit, and when you think it's good, which I know this one's not the greatest, you hit compare and it analyzes it and it tells you how good you are. So you can actually see where my handles would be. So the whole reason I gave you this is just so you can start to get that feel for bending and seeing how lines and curves actually need to continue in a nice smooth path with one another. So you can play that game. Somewhere I probably gave you like a mini lesson from Adobe to learn the pen tool. So it's definitely helpful to hear it from someone else as well. So here I actually gave you 3 different ones. These are not required. We're not doing these in class since I made my own. But Adobe has their own 3 that I gave you links to with videos. And there might even be another explanation here. So this is just an explanation And of course, it's a much shorter explanation, but you don't do anything other than watch the video. This is right off of YouTube. So that was the pen tool demo.